to everyone from Washington, D.C. So I get to the Tampa airport today, this afternoon, and you guys know I have not flown since 2018 because we have an RV and we drive everywhere. So I told my husband, I'm going to brace for I'm not going to have a clue how to do anything. And it was literally like I was 3 years old going into an airport for the first time. Everything is different. So they have moved the security from the main terminal at Tampa's airport. It used to be like in the main body, and then you go out on a little shuttle to your gate. They've moved it to the gate area, and it's all automated. So instead of giving your ID to the lady, she's looking at me like I'm retarded. She's like, stick it in the machine. So I stuck it in the machine. I went through the whole thing, and I have these little bootlet things on, which set off every alarm bell in the airport. So I had to take my bootlets off and put them, had to go find my little tray and stick them in there. And everything's automated. You know, you have it on your phone. You just like show your phone to everybody. It's so stupid. And so I was like completely disoriented. And I get to Marriott, and there's none of the stations are labeled. So I'm a rewards, from the time that I was in the military, and I still have like a gazillion points. And so I just went right up through the VIP thing, and everything here is automated. So I get to the elevator, and I just got on the elevator and told the guy to push 11, and he goes, that's not the way it works. So I got back off the elevator, because you actually have to go over to a screen and type in or select your floor, and it pre-programs the elevator to go just to that floor. And I'm like, holy crap. So, and you check into your room with your phone. So
that's crazy.
Everything has changed. Everything. So again, I was like, a little kid going through all of this as if it was the first time I've ever traveled in my life, because every aspect of it has changed since the last time I traveled and didn't stay in my RV. So when I got to the hotel, I called my husband. I'm like, I don't like this at all. I want you to drive the RV up here and pick me up.
Oh, that's hysterical.
Yeah. And even last night when I was packing my bag, I have a double of everything in the house in the RV. I have all my toothbrush, my hairbrush, my blow dryer, like my whole set of makeup. I bought everything of 2. So I had to cram it all in my carry-on bag. And I just looked at my husband and I'm like, I really don't like this at all. So anyway, I'm here. And
yay!
Luckily, so I took a taxi from the airport to the hotel, and my driver was from Egypt. So we talked the whole way here about the Middle East, which was awesome. And he was complaining about how there's no work here because DC's closed. Nobody's traveling for meetings or anything. He said he waited in the taxi line for 2 hours to pick up one ride. So I gave him a really nice.
Walking into the ghost town.
It is literally, well, I'm compared to what it normally is. It is a ghost town. There was still a good bit of traffic, but it is a ghost town. Nobody walking on the streets. Nothing like normally would be at that hour. So, we're driving by the Department of Commerce and the Department of Agriculture and all of that stuff, because I'm literally right down like a block from the White House. And it is like a ghost town. nobody in the lobby. So very interesting. Yeah. So anyway, I'm here. And they added a whole bunch of different speakers for tomorrow. James O'Keefe is going to be there, and a whole bunch of other people. So I'll take notes, and tomorrow,
that'd be good.
Yeah, tomorrow night I'll kind of give you guys a debrief of what's going on. But wow, wow, that's all I can say is wow. So anyway, we're going to get into chapter 1 of our corporate coup book. And it's labeled The Medieval Siege. And it starts off talking about the void that was left by Hugo Chavez with his premature death and Nicolas Maduro taking over. Many of the Chavismo foreign sympathizers have since become prone to observing that Maduro is not Chavez, insinuating the former was more authoritarian, less committed to revolutionary ideals, and less equipped to manage the Venezuelan affairs as his predecessor had been. And his predecessor had been widely admired by Western progressives and even embraced by liberal celebrities. Now, Maduro was just kind of like a hanger-on. Venezuela's U.S.-backed opposition waged an open revolt against Maduro's presidency from its onset. Though Chavez weathered his own U.S.-directed coup and periodic street protests, which we'll go into later, he was not subject to the same level of disdain, turbulent insurgency that Maduro was, or is. In addition to the foreign-sponsored chaos and resulting political deadlock that defined the early years of his presidency, Maduro was forced to confront global economic shifts and sophisticated tactics of financial warfare that Chavez had never experienced. Within a year of his inauguration, Maduro was set with an abrupt oil crash that saw international price drop 40% in just 6 months. The plunge came on the immediate heels of the U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry, June 2014 trip to Saudi Arabia, during which he lobbied Riyadh to boost crude production and collapse the global market through the basic law of supply and demand. Now, let me also say here, this is something that's a reoccurring theme. When you want to topple an oil-rich country, you collude with Saudi Arabia. And remember, at the time, the corrupt Saudi Arabia government was still in charge, not MBS. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that John Kerry goes over there on behalf of the oil oligarchs in the United States and gets the corrupt Saudi government in order to do this. The request came as part of the Obama administration's strategy to force Iran, another top oil producer, into entering the JPOA and comply with limits on its domestic nuclear program, while weakening Tehran, which ultimately signed the JPOA. The following year, the 2014 slump had the added effect of destabilizing Venezuela, as well as Russia. Aside from a brief blip amid the global recession in 2008, oil prices steadily surged throughout the Chavez era, enabling his government to carry out aggressive social investments. By prompting a substantial reduction in Venezuela's oil earnings, the government revenue in Caracas in 2014 crashed, presenting Maduro's first major obstacle in sustaining his agenda. As international crude prices plummeted, the Obama White House launched a complementary assault aimed directly at the financial coffers of Maduro's government. In December 2014, Obama signed the first set of unilateral U.S. sanctions on Venezuela, officially kicking off a campaign of economic terror against Caracas that has never stopped. It was dubbed the Venezuela Defense of Human Rights and Civil Society Act, which basically means it's the exact opposite. The financial restrictions were billed as punishment for Maduro's crackdown on U.S. sponsored Salida riots earlier that year. And remember, those are the riots that were funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, IRI, the Republican part of the National Endowment for Democracy, and reinforces that it's two wings of the same bird. He's doing exactly what a Republican did and will do when John Bolton comes in. There literally is no difference. 3 months later, Obama issued an executive order classifying Venezuela as an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security of the United States. They really don't even have an army that can touch the United States. The absurd policy that the administration never justified, but predictably drove Venezuela's economy into a tailspin. Obama's March 2015 announcement sent international financial institutions a message to steer clear of Venezuela or risk facing Washington's wrath, raising the implied risk of exchange with any bank account linked to the country overnight. The National Security Declaration thus precipitated a massive reduction in the Venezuelan private sector access to international credit lines, because they still have independent companies trying to do business, not just the oil industry. No one was allowed to deal in Venezuela at all. It spurred an 80% drop in imports to the country between 2013 and 2019. Stratfor, a private U.S. intelligence contractor, illustrated the depths of the crisis by comparing two satellite images of Venezuela's main import hub in Puerto Cabello, captured over the course of just 3 years. In a 2015 assessment noted on its website, Stratfor juxtaposed a February 2012 photo of the port that depicted thousands of shipping containers clustered all over the harbor with an image 3 years later in 2015, which was virtually empty. Oil revenue accounted for nearly 95% of Venezuela's export by value, so the country was among the hardest hit by the fall of the oil price. Venezuela's government simply has much less money to import goods. Stratfor failed to mention the Obama's White House sanction blitz on Caracas. Instead, they blamed Venezuela's hardship on Venezuela's unwillingness to reform. The firm went on to accurately predict that the import crunch would result in major wins for the anti-Chavista coalition in legislative elections slated for December 15th, using economic warfare to achieve political results. Indeed, by then, the external assault on Venezuela's import capacity had given way to a nationwide shortage of even basic goods. The country's local oligarchy, which still controlled roughly 62% of its domestic commodity market, despite Chavez's rise, happily exacerbated the crisis by hoarding products linked to their supply chains. In time, supply shortages drove the formation of a lucrative black market for fuel and other goods, sparking an infamous spike in the country's rate of inflation. By the time Donald Trump assumed the US presidency in January of 2017, the neoconservative ideologues that would take hold of his administration were likely salivating at the prospect of inheriting Washington's war on Caracas. Though candidate Trump vowed to disentangle the US from decades of disastrous regime change wars, the American continent proved a consequential blind spot for the president. Hostage to sectarian Cuban and Venezuela immigrants in South Florida, a key electoral prize for any U.S. candidate, Trump eventually enabled Washington's most notorious group to commandeer his approach to Latin America and the Caribbean. In April 2018, he shocked many of his supporters by appointing notorious neocon John Bolton to lead the National Security Council. 5 months later, Bolton selected Latin American hawk Mauricio Claver Caroni, a Cuban American, to head the council's division on Western Hemisphere. Within a matter of weeks, Trump's Latin American policy had been hijacked by the very beltway swamp creatures upon which he had previously declared war. Throughout his first year in the White House, Trump steadily ratcheted up the economic war his predecessor initiated against Venezuela. In August 2017, he signed an executive order that officially banned transactions relating to the issuance of new debt to Venezuela's government in U.S. markets, further restraining Maduro's access to foreign credit lines. In March of 2018, 3 years following the initiation of Obama's financial assault on Caracas, the international credit rating company Moody had downgraded Venezuela to a C classification, the lowest possible grade. A direct result of U.S. sanctions on Maduro's government, the Moody decision delivered Venezuela's tortured economy a decisive blow. According to Caracas's ambassador to the UN, Samuel Mancedo, the Moody's downgrade made it so that everything going on in Venezuela would be 3 or 4 times the insurance premium of shipments to other nations. As a result, ships don't want to go to Venezuela and companies don't want to deal with us. Yet the fact that Moody's awarded war-torn countries like Iraq and Congo higher scores than Venezuela, which enabled Baghdad and the Congo to access greater lines of international credit exposed to politicized nature. Though Venezuela was technically at peace, Moody's action effectively imposed a wartime economy on the country, indefinitely limiting its ability to freely participate in international trade. To the U.S. officials overseeing the controlled demolition of Venezuela's economy, Caracas's financial woes were merely a product of Chavismo. Not long ago, Venezuela was one of the richest countries on earth, Trump said during a September 2018 address before the UN General Assembly in New York, unrolling yet another round of sanctions on Caracas. Today, socialism has bankrupted the oil-rich nation and driven its people into poverty. But it wasn't socialism that did it. It was an economic war that had been declared against Venezuela. The White House interventionist policies toward Latin America was further articulated in a landmark address Bolton delivered that November. He was speaking at Miami-Dade University. Bolton vowed Trump's administration would no longer appease dictators and despots near our shores in this hemisphere, taking aim at what he characterized as a troika of tyranny that dominated the region: Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, all targets of regime change. Crafted in part as a rebuke to Obama's normalization efforts with Cuba, Bolton's address put governments in Havana, Managua, and Caracas on notice that their overthrow was a top priority for the Trump administration. Indeed, Bolton's troika of tyranny declaration represented far more than a smear campaign devised to tarnish the reputations of Washington's regional foes. Rather, it echoed the belligerent foreign policy that George W. Bush inaugurated in his 2002 State of the Union address when he classified Iraq, Iran, and North Korea as the axis of evil, arming to arming to threaten the peace of the world. Widely regarded as regime change wish list, Bush's axis of evil speech served as a formal declaration in Washington's War on Terror, a fatal endeavor that was NATO-led military campaign in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and the surrounding area. The reverberations of the axis of evil beyond Bush's original hit list was no accident. Months after the president's address, a senior State Department official delivered a talk entitled Beyond the Axis of Evil. Because the axis of evil is not enough. We're going to go big. During which he added the governments of Syria, Libya, and Cuba to the regime change docket. Speaking at the Conservative Heritage Foundation think tank in Washington, D.C., the official tasked with expanding the axis of evil target list was none other than John Bolton. Nearly 20 years later, Bolton would bring his regime change fantasies for sloganism and distinctly walrus-like mustache to the Trump White House, a turn of events that culminated with Washington's recognition of Guaido just 2 months following his Troika of Tyranny tirade. The neocon takeover of U.S. Latin American policy was solidified with the immediate aftermath of Guaido's January 2019 swearing-in ceremony, where Trump tapped bona fide beast of the Beltway, Elliot Abrams, as his special envoy to Caracas. Described by Bolton as an old friend, Abrams was best known for his lead role in the Iran-Contra affair of the early 1980s, where he directed Washington's dirty war against the fighters in Central America as a senior State Department official. In 1991, Abrams pleaded guilty to withholding information about U.S. material support to the Nicaraguan paramilitary groups, a direct violation of Washington's official ban on aid from Congress. Though George H.W. Bush pardoned him the following year, Abrams would go on to serve in Bush Jr.'s national security team and orchestrate a failed military coup against Chavez in April 2002, just weeks following the U.S. president's Axis of Evil address. Alongside Bolton's resurgence, Abrams' 2019 resurrection marked a fateful reproach to Trump's pledge to drain the swamp. Rather than drive a stake in the heart of the establishment zombies most responsible for ill-fated wars of the past, his White House had impulsively absorbed the most noxious ones circulating throughout Washington's septic imperial core. Following Guaido's ascent, these devious characters ratcheted up Washington's assault on Venezuela to heights previously imperceptible to not only Caracas, but also their own colleagues in the Trump administration. On January 28, 2019, Trump signed a blanket ban on the sale of Venezuela crude in U.S. markets, a ploy designed to further restrict Maduro's access to vital revenue, and one that previewed Joe Biden's subsequent embargo of Russian oil in 2022. The Treasury intensified its stranglehold on Venezuela's oil sector throughout the preceding months, even issuing a so-called secondary sanction against non-U.S. entities that maintain commercial relationships with the Maduro government. As far as the swamp were concerned, not even sovereign borders were barriers to Washington's financial terror. The U.S. Treasury jurisdiction permeated all corners of the planet. And so basically, just like we were just doing with Russia, if you trade with them, you're going to get dinged. So it's not enough that as a country, we just say we're not going to trade with them and we're going to sanction them. We intimidate all the other countries to do what we want them to do. Bolton took credit for personally crafting Washington's approach to Venezuela's sanction regime in his 2020 memoir, The Room Where It Happened, complaining that even Trump's Treasury Secretary and Goldman Sachs executive, Steve Mnuchin, expressed concern the measures would blow back against U.S. interests, which they did. According to Bolton, Mnuchin believed the extreme policy would not only hinder U.S. commercial activity abroad, but also prompt a surge in international oil prices that would inadvertently hurt U.S. consumers. Treasury treated every new sanction decision as if they were prosecuting criminal cases in court, Bolton complained. But that's not how sanctions work, he said. They're about using America's massive economic power to advance our national interest. But it's not our national interest they're concerned with. It's the interest of the oligarchs. Our national interests are not enhanced by beating up other countries. As a matter of fact, we suffer greatly when that happens. Like nearly all professional ventures of Bolton's, his crusade on Caracas would be measured in death and destruction. By 2020, Venezuela was in the midst of the largest economic contraction in modern Latin American history, reporting a 75% drop in gross domestic product from its peak just 8 years before. The downturn drove a pronounced fall in the purchasing power of ordinary Venezuelans, leading to a 72% decline in living standards. In the political age of protracted polarity and performative partisan theater, Francisco Rodriguez is perhaps the most moderate Venezuelan one could encounter. Though he hailed from a prominent family, his father was a popular Ascensión Democrática lawmaker and government minister under President Carlos Andrés Perez. Rodriguez did not enter politics himself until 2000. That year, the Harvard-educated economist returned to Caracas to lead Venezuela's equivalent of the Congressional Budget Office. Selected as a consensus pick, tasked with mediating between the freshly inaugurated Chavista government and its political opponent, Rodriguez's discreet disposition eventually placed him in direct conflict with the ideologues on both sides of the aisle, including a young lawmaker named Nicolas Maduro. In his soon-to-be publicized memoir, Scorched Earth, The Political Economy of Venezuela's Collapse, Rodriguez recalled that one of his most intense conflicts with Chavismo came in the form of a spat with Maduro, then head of the National Assembly's Social Development Commission, over the former's unfavorable review of a proposed Social Security legislation. The economist's critical nature eventually inspired a successful Chavista-led campaign to remove him from office in March of 2004. Though Rodriguez legally protested the controversial move, Venezuela's Supreme Court ultimately upheld the National Assembly's vote for his dismissal. Following his ouster, Rodriguez moved stateside and established himself as one of the Chavismo's most prominent distractors, while animating coveted posts in academia and on Wall Street, including a Latin American analyst for Bank of America's Merrill Lynch in New York. In 2018, he advised anti-Chavista presidential candidate Henry Falcon in his failed bid to unseat Maduro. To this day, neither Falcon nor Rodriguez have recognized the vote's outcome. Yet while other U.S.-based opposition figures featured in this book including Harvard professor and Guido advisor Ricardo Hausmann, used their influence to agitate for increased economic warfare and even military action against their homeland. Rodriguez remained true to his analytical and balanced character. Rather than fan the flames of hybrid war, Rodriguez employed his academic bona fides to produce a series of reports thoroughly documenting and detailing and exposing the gruesome legacy of Washington's Venezuela policy. So she highlights this guy because he's no fan of Maduro. Rodriguez published one such review, a study outlining the impact of U.S. sanctions on Venezuela's economy, in January of 2022. The in-depth data production and analysis, he determined that Washington's sanctions were the decisive factor behind the rapid collapse of Venezuelan oil production between the years 2016 and 2021, a development that in turn drove the country's unprecedented economic contraction. So it had nothing to do with socialism or benefits, the social programs that were trying to be installed down there. It had everything to do with economic warfare. In the chart below, Rodriguez traced 4 significant drops in Venezuelan oil production between 2008 and 2021, illustrating that 3 of the downturns directly corresponded with new U.S. sanctions on Caracas. In Rodriguez's words, the time series data represented a statistical smoking gun implicating the U.S. in Venezuela's economic meltdown. Yes, the economy was being poorly managed, Rodriguez said, shortly after publishing the data, emphasizing his critical view of Maduro's fiscal policy. But its oil sector was not collapsing, and nobody, no macroeconomic analyst, no oil sector analyst, predicted something remotely resembling the type of collapse that we saw. The economist went on saying sanctions were essentially a surgical strike directed at Venezuela's oil sector. By suffocating the oil sector earnings, access to international credit, and import capacity, U.S. sanctions not only deprived Maduro's government of cash required to sustain the agenda, but plunged Venezuela into a nationwide humanitarian emergency. In April 2019, the DC-based Center for Economic and Policy Research think tank published a bracing paper that concluded U.S. sanctions amounted to collective punishment of the Venezuelan population. According to the co-authors Jeffrey Sachs and Mark Weisbrot, U.S. sanctions drove a 31% increase in Venezuela's mortality rate between the years 2017 and 2018. The report's findings were bolstered by international legal scholars. Following a reporting trip to the country in 2017, one other economist published a review of U.S. policy towards Venezuela that determined Washington sanctions were comparable to medieval sieges of town with the intention of forcing them to surrender. 21st century sanctions attempt to bring down not a town, but an entire country. According to that report, this modern day siege warfare was accompanied by the manipulation of public opinion through fake news, aggressive public relation firms funded by NGOs that ultimately reinforce Washington's regime change narratives. Indeed, foreign media typically painted Maduro as a comical, inept autocrat in Caracas, being indifferent to the suffering of his people. Conveniently, the press played out projection of Venezuelan despot feasting on the remains of his vanquished petrostate, accompanied their conscious erasure of Washington's years of financial assault on Caracas. By the time Guaido arrived on the world stage, the very media apparatus that once eagerly sold Western public a war in Iraq was spinning a tale of rogue communist regimes lurking just beyond the Florida southern coast. This transformed from populist revolutionary to de facto wartime president. By 2019, Maduro stood toe to toe with the architects of Washington's most um, expansive foreign exploits. And to survive, he would have to craft his own signature defense against this hybrid warfare. So, hold on just a second. I have got to plug in my phone. Hold on just a second. Ugh. All right. I'm also trying out this setup for my show with Alpha tonight. I wasn't sure if the Wi-Fi band would allow us to do that. So that's the end of chapter 1. And I don't want to start chapter 2 because it's an actual whole show by itself. And it's about it's a horrible story about one of the Venezuelan officials and what the international community did to him. So I want to save that for tomorrow evening and go through that as one whole chapter because it's going to make your toes curl. So we're going to stop there. Go ahead, Illini.
Hey, Colonel. I'm going to take a different perspective than the author on this, except she has a point about the secondary sanctions. But that said, I mean, if you look at this from the perspective of the United States during the aughts, the federal government recognized BP, Chevron, Exxon as, having obtained the rights to produce the oil, and as having put a lot of investment into the ground as part of the production process, and then seeing that get expropriated. Now, a sovereign country, if they're allowed to take our stuff, that's those rules are okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got the right to get insurance from our country. The U.S.'s response saying that we're not going to allow you guys to obtain insurance or to trade with the United States or Great Britain or other NATO allies, that seems to be proportionate.
Except it's not it's not just isolated to
the
NATO.
Secondary sanctions were the disproportionate part.
Yeah, it's not just isolated to NATO. And again, it goes country to country. So if the purpose of NATO is to be able to not just in military warfare, but also in economic warfare to beat up the rest of the world while they control the IMF, the World Bank, and that trade. We're going to get to the actual decision that was made and the process that resulted in that claim against Venezuela for reappropriating their oil. And again, you make a correlation where I don't believe there is one. You transitioned or lumped into one basket the corporation's investment that is headquartered in the United States with Venezuela to the entire country of the United States. You can't say we don't get any profits from Standard Oil or Exxon or anything. They pocket their own profits as well as their shareholders. And their shareholders are not just U.S. people. It's a transnational company. So they invested, got a concession in Venezuela that was then taken away from them. Now, if the United States government wants to stand behind that corporation and use the military might or the financial institutions to wage economic warfare on behalf of that headquarters, that company that's headquartered here, that's one topic, and we can debate that topic. But in every one of these cases, like back in 1953, when we decided that we were going to overthrow the government of Iran, we didn't get anything from that. We had people involved in that, and there were US Americans that died doing that, and we got nothing from that. Standard Oil got 34% of the investment in that. The CIA was working on their behalf to get them a foot in the door into that concession. And so I make a distinct difference between the corporations, the US government, and the American people. The American people die so these oligarchs can continue to do business in these foreign countries. And then they have on speed dial the US government, mainly the CIA, to go fight their wars for them to increase their profits.
You have a point that if the Venezuelan government were to rip me off of stuff, the federal government probably wouldn't intervene on my behalf.
Absolutely not.
I don't see that as a valid argument from the issues with our internal politics as a valid argument from the Venezuelan perspective that our response was disproportionate. I think it was a little bit disproportionate. I think the secondary sanctions are unfair, but if we had stayed away from that, I think it would have been
the U.S.
eminently reasonable response.
Yeah, I think the U.S. government has, if they want to protect a U.S. corporation, and I can argue that point. But if that's the case, what I absolutely disagree with vehemently is that we have a right to orchestrate a complete cutoff from the rest of the world. And we use economic warfare for anybody else that dares to go to do business with them. I absolutely think that's abhorrent. I think you can do whatever you want as a sovereign country. And if it's our government's decision to sanction Venezuela, so be it. But then to go around to every other country, and because we control the IMF and because we control the World Bank, they are all supposed to be neutral. They are all supposed to be doing what they do neutrally, which we all know they're not. That's, in my opinion, bullshit. But that's my opinion.
Fair point.
It's literally like we have the big economic stick, and you have to do what we say collectively worldwide. I don't think that's the position of the United States. I don't think it should have ever been the position of the United States. Because
it's
again,
your space, Colonel. I wanted to sort of raise, the alternative point on it.
No, I'm glad you did. Yeah, I'm glad you did. Because this is a conversation we as Americans need to have. What is the role of the United States in the world? Are we going to be the battering ram for the U.S. corporations and their wealth? Because ultimately, for the U.S. population, I also look at it from the perspective of political, economic, and military warfare. So you do political warfare where that's the State Department, that's the president, with the diplomats in Venezuela, with the president of Venezuela, when they fight to an impasse politically. Then you wage economic warfare, where you strangle the country. You make their economy scream. And if we want to do that as a country, not coerce everybody else in the world to do it too, but if we wanted to do that solely as the United States, that's the second order of warfare. When both of those fail, and you have politicians that absolutely are working on behalf of oligarchs, and it gets to the military warfare where we now have committed forces to overthrow the government, that's where I have a real problem with this whole scenario. Because now, as in every one of these wars that we fought, Iraq, all of this shit, Syria, we're doing it not for our country's national interest. We're doing it for oligarchs' interest in oil. And I don't want to die for oil. I'm sorry, I just don't. We've got our own stupid oil. And while our country is demanding access to everybody else's oil, we're not using our own.
Good point, Colonel. I'm with you there.
Yeah, that's the part that pisses me off the most, actually. You shut down our oil capability, and then you want Americans to go die on a foreign battlefield for these assholes to have access to oil? I'm sorry, I'm out. I'm out. That's the one thing that would make me give up my oath, because I'm out. I think that whole thing is bullshit. Go ahead, SR.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank everyone for attending here on Spaces and on Rumble. Sorry I'm late.
That's okay.
But heading to Illini and the conversation that's going on here, I agree with the fact that, yes, when the United States decides to put sanctions on a country, the answer is everybody in NATO and all allies are subject to those sanctions as well. It's called they have to do it and follow suit. Now, in this instance with Russia, what's unique here is companies pulled out. Had nothing to do with sanctions. They pulled out. They were told to leave. So you had McDonald's leave. You had all these other people leave Russia because sanctions weren't going to work, and they knew that. Now you have China and BRICS and everybody else on the financial front saying, oh, we understand the financial implications now. Russia didn't steal anything from us. We left. Keep that in mind. Yet, you want to steal yachts, you want to steal their money that's banked elsewhere, that's okay. That's not working now with the financial situation that's going on. So I see a lot of changes coming. Thank you, Colonel.
Sure. Well, and the other point, which is kind of the irony of the whole thing, what happens every single time we do this? What happened in Chile, Allende, when we made their economy scream? Where'd they go?
Russia.
Yeah.
Right. They go to Russia, they go to China.
And technically it was the Soviet Union. And then what did the CIA say to them when they went to the Soviet Union for help? They called them
We're going to overthrow your country.
They called them,
communist.
yeah, they called them communist. So what we're doing with these economic warfare and political warfare tactics is you are pushing people into the sphere of your enemy. And instead of allowing Venezuela to be whatever it's going to be, just let it be whatever it's going to be. If it's going to crash, it's going to crash. If it's going to work and be a socialist utopia, like Sweden with all of these, and they don't even have the natural resources to support it. They do it via tax, but have government paid for education, government paid for healthcare, government paid for everything. It's either going to survive or it's not. Are we afraid that it's going to survive and that's going to be an alternative model? I don't understand why we're so fixated, because you can't say that you think it's a communist country because you're turning around doing shit to force them into the so-called communist sphere of China and Russia. It just literally makes no sense to me. Okay. Renee, go ahead.
Hey, Colonel. Hey, good evening, everyone. Colonel, glad you made it to Washington safely. And just a quick comment about those damn elevators that you can't push a button when you're inside. I hate them as well, because if you you push the wrong number or you change your mind, you're stuck in the elevator. So I think it's a trap. I don't like it.
I have no idea who thought that was a good idea.
It's a trap. I say no to that. But I wanted to share with you guys, recently, I think that a couple of people, speaking of Venezuela and mafia, when I was in my 20s, in the 90s, I lived in New York City, and I used to be a cocktail waitress at this place called Sign of the Dove in New York City. And there were always these mafioso guys that would come in, get the same table, get the fancy wine. And they were very nice and nice tippers and everything. And all these cats would always go to Florida, and they would always go to Aruba. So I started thinking about, mafia, Venezuela, Aruba, and checking into this stuff. And there's a lot to dig up on Yandex with mafia connections and, Cuba, Venezuela, Aruba, that whole sector. And I, on yesterday's show in the Purple Pill, I posted some links that I found. And today I put in the Purple Pill as well. I don't know how legit it is, and I didn't get a chance to fact check anything yet, but it's super wild article and names connecting Italian nobility and certain families of the Bourbon and Two Sicily, House of Bourbon, Parma, etc., connecting to a mafia group. I don't know how to really pronounce it. It's called like Contrara, Crarana, or I don't know how to say it. But anyway, I put it in the Purple Pill. But it's pretty wild, and it even goes back into the nobility family of Castro, which is connected to Fidel Castro. I don't know how accurate it is, but if y'all want some entertaining stuff, go check it out. It's really interesting. I don't know, but it's a pretty fascinating article.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Illini and I were just DMing about some real nefarious connections as far as the mafia and stuff like that goes. So that's hilarious. I don't know how you say your name. Redon?
Reason, perhaps. Yeah, I'm taking a chance here. I'm running on a PC and Linux, and the audio keeps dropping out on spaces, so I'm reluctant to get in and actually speak. But I wanted to bring up a couple questions before we got too far away from them. You were talking about the economic warfare down there in Venezuela, and I couldn't help but recall back around the Iraq conflagration, there was a backlash about, no war for oil, no war for oil. I forget where exactly it was coming from, but it was out there. And then the other question of, this economic warfare down in South America, it's not being waged on behalf of the government, is it? It's being waged on behalf of our, so-called deep state funding their nefarious black bag stuff, right?
So, two different things. It's not it's part of the waging of the covert activities is done by the deep state, but the actual economic warfare is done on behalf of the oligarchs in the United States, and it's done very overtly. You know exactly what companies in the United States benefit based on the resources in the country, and we've been exposing that. So, for example, in Colombia, control of Colombia was done for oil and mining, as well as cocaine, of course. But that's the covert piece of it. So you have a whole bunch of different activities going on at the same time. You have overt and you have covert, and they work in conjunction with each other, but at their potential gains are not necessarily for the same reason. So if we can go in and destabilize a country like Afghanistan with all of that opium there, there was pipelines being planned for Afghanistan. So we're overtly going there to control that country for the oligarchs that are going to benefit from the pipeline. But at the same time, covertly, you have the CIA there reaping the rewards of the opium and the black market cash that comes along with that. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, one of my personal bugaboo is Ed Bernays, and he was really involved down there in South America with United Fruit.
Yes, he was.
The bananas.
Yes.
And, United Fruit owned a lot of property in a lot of countries down there.
Yes, they did.
And they weren't doing a lot with some of it. And the whole thing about Guatemala, what was it, 1954, I think it was? They were going to basically use kind of an eminent domain thing to reclaim unused land from United Fruit. And UFC hired Ed Bernays, and he started a campaign down there. He was working with the CIA, and
yes, we've talked about that
down there.
Yeah, we've talked about that.
So it's it seems like they certainly have a playbook for it somewhere.
They have several playbooks that they use for that purpose. And again, the overt side of that was the United Fruit. The covert side of that was the use of the CIA in the destabilization of that. And of course, they used Guatemala covertly afterwards for decades to launch operations throughout Latin America, to include the Bay of Pigs, to include Iran-Contra in nearby Nicaragua. It became a hotbed of covert activity because we installed a military dictator that we controlled that just let us do everything because we're the ones that kept them in power. Go ahead, Illini.
Hey, Colonel. To Renee's point, in Operation Gladio, we referred to the P2 propaganda duet Masonic Lodge.
Yeah.
There was a P1.
Yes, there was.
That was founded in 1870.
Yep.
Now, the article that I've been looking at, there's this 93 article from the Executive Intelligence Report, and I think they make a mistake in there because there's a Giuseppe Mazzoni and then there's a Giuseppe Mazzini, and both of them are Masons inducted into the Scottish Rite. One of them founds P1. Both of them are from Northern Italy. But the other one, also a Mason, who's also corresponding with all these other, Italian Masons and people in the Scottish Rite, is working with the British East India Company as part of the Opium War.
Yes.
And he's basically advising them, as well as advising a number of other nationalist movements on how to sort of, run their own campaigns and destabilize, these different principalities and get their objective of, I think forming modern Italy, for instance. So is there? So there's a little bit of a break in the thread where I don't agree necessarily. I'm not 100% on board with EIR's interpretation of it, but it does seem to be this link going further back.
So there definitely is. And who got rid of the P1 and the mafia in Italy?
That was Mussolini.
Yeah. And then as soon as Mussolini's gone, it comes right back.
There you go. I mean, we send Lucky Luciano back to Sicily.
Yes, we did.
And he was a very valuable intelligence partner during World War II, and at least according, I think, to the Kefauver committees.
Yep.
Well after that, as well as Lucian Conine in his interview with Alfred McCoy in 1971.
Yeah, and Conine is the guy that was the link from Vietnam and the Laos opium into the Sicilian labs that made its way to Cuba in plastic oranges and into New York and Miami.
There you go. And then, of course, that gives you the whole Operation Gladio narrative there.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be a connection, potentially through Mason. I mean, potentially through certain Italian Masons, of this overall strategy of tension.
Absolutely. And the only other faction of P2 was where? Where did they open?
I don't know this one, Colonel. Where?
Argentina. Gelli.
Wow. I mean, yeah, that is true.
Gelli.
There were links to the Scottish Rite. Into Latin America.
Yeah, Gelli, the guy that was running the P2, the Grand Poobah, whatever they call it, Grand Masonic Mason guy in P2 in Italy that was running the whole shit show, traveled routinely to Argentina and set up a P2 Masonic lodge there. At the same time,
and
we were
cooing. Where the rat line.
Yeah. At the
and
same.
It was also where the rat line dumped out the Nazis.
Yeah. At the same time, we were cooing Argentina. Yeah.
Wild.
It's so weird how all of these things cross one another when you start peeling back this onion. Yeah. And it branched out. I'm not P2 specifically, but the entire operation, because not only, as Bridget just said, did we drop off Nazis, a lot of Nazis in Argentina, but Nazis popped up in Chile with the Colony of Dignity. They popped up in Uruguay and Paraguay and Brazil, all of which we could.
Just a coincidence, I'm sure.
Yeah. Called Operation Condor. Yeah. It's crazy. It is a crazy story. Go ahead, Renee.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Elaine. I am kind of familiar with that. Wasn't it Albert Pike who was connected with Mazzini? And
Yes.
Albert Pike is the one who started the lodge in Charleston, South Carolina.
Yes.
Also, it's didn't we read a book? You reviewed a book a while ago. It's all blurring for me. I'm sorry to say, but there was one book you read, Colonel, and they listed all the like P1, P2, P3, P4.
Yes.
And I'm trying to find that list on the internet, and I cannot. If anyone ever knows all the P's again, please post it or share it or something, because I'm very. I think about that a lot in what's going on in Venezuela. Well, I mean, if you go to the South in Charleston and the Scottish Rite, and then you go to the Knights of the Golden Circle, their whole plan being was the South, including the Caribbean,
yes,
and Central America, and the northern chunk of South America. The kind of whole Pan-American thing seems very relevant. Like it actually happened in a weird way, and it looks maybe like we are Trump and his teams are dismantling that whole operation. Fingers crossed, hopefully. Did you say, Illini, that you found the P1 was in northern Italy?
It was
it in
Turin,
Turin?
I think.
Turin, yes.
I think Turin, yeah.
Yes, get a load of this. So I was looking into that because Patrick Burns on one of his videos mentioned this typewriter Olivetti, and there's something about the Olivetti typewriter company that is connected to the Smartmatic Dominion system. So I was looking into Olivetti, and apparently the gentleman who created that typewriter, he passed away. I don't know if it was in the 60s or something around that time. And the people who didn't want it to disappear and invested in it, kind of saved it, was the Fiat company, Pirelli, and who else? It's something I never heard of. Colonel, you guys may have heard of this. It's called the IRI. My Italian, sorry. Rico, it looks like Reconstruction Industrial. I don't know. Institute of Reconstructing Industrialization is what it means.
Yeah, I've come across that. Yeah, I've come across
that.
And
that was, I looked into that company. I mean, Fiat, we all know that family has a lot of drama and scandal. I wasn't very familiar with Pirelli, but that's a tire company. So, of course, they're getting rubber. And anyway, they are all based in Turin. And when I was uncovering all this, and I don't have any good links. If I find some, I'll share with you all about this Olivetti story and these guys. But I get very P2 vibes, and that would make total sense if P1 is in Turin, because that was like the industrial center, the nobility center, the wealthy center. It makes total sense. Yeah, it's all connecting.
Yeah, it's crazy when you start looking into the different things. And that's another interesting link. The National Cash Register company that James Angleton's father owned the franchise for in Italy. And he was a spy. He was using his cash register company to get into all of the businesses and spying even before World War II, but maintained that. And that's why James Angleton had spent so much time in Italy prior to World War II, was because he grew up there because of his father's franchise of the National Cash Register company.
I have a direct response to Renee on Albert Pike.
Go ahead.
But if SR 71 has another point that's in direct response, he had his hand up first.
Go ahead, SR. SR? We'll come back to him.
Sorry about that, Colonel.
Oh, okay.
Would help if I hit the mic.
Yeah, it does.
From what I gathered, P2 was in Turin. That's what was in Turin. It operated out of Rome under the Grand Orient of Italy. P3, a successor group, looked like it came from, it was in Milan and Sardinia is where that one originated. P4 seems to be a conglomeration around the world and an international movement or a national movement across the board. P1 itself was primarily associated with Palazzo Giustiniani until 1985, now Via del Vascello, which was also in Italy. That's what I've gathered from all four of those.
Yeah, but there's a whole bunch of them. I had a list of them.
Yes, I'm sure there are plenty more to be uncovered. They just grew like wildfire.
Right.
SR 71, I'm on the Wikipedia page right now. It could be wrong. The quotes underneath the foundation section, second paragraph, is propaganda was founded in 1877 in Turin as propaganda masonica. This lodge was frequented by politicians and government officials from across Italy. Now, we're not describing P2 or the P3 and P4, but 1877, Turin, there's something on Wikipedia about that. On the Pike comments, it's interesting. The Executive Intelligence Report article that I read, I haven't run this one to the ground yet, but they cite him as running a book, for some of the foundational issues in Masonry, called Morals and Dogma. He's got some very interesting writings in there. And I wouldn't necessarily call them, I wouldn't call it Satanism, but it's a little bit Luciferian, and, a lot of talk about the light bearer, and, the satanic balance between the Manichaeans and, the ruler of the material world versus the spiritual world. There's some commentary in there which is kind of interesting. And then if you kind of interact all of that with the Franklin scandal, there's a small chance here that some of the research on all of this, it's not a 50% chance, but there's a 10% chance that if we keep digging on this, we might, find an answer to probably one of the most important questions in history.
I agree.
Thank you for that, Illini.
Yeah, I have that list somewhere. I'll have to find it. That listed all the other ones.
Yeah, thank you. They don't call it propaganda for nothing, y'all.
Yep.
Amen.
All right. I don't see any more hands, so we're going to call it a night. Now that I know this actually works, we'll be able to do our 9:30 with Alpha. So hopefully it's going to be the last one in that series, and we can move on to something else. The Freedom House.
What's the expected time for tomorrow?
It's going to be probably around the same time, between 7 and 8. I'll try to, I don't know what's going to happen. The meeting ends at 2. So, I don't know if there's any groups that are getting together afterwards. So, I'm going to kind of say it's between 7 and 8 again. And we'll just go from there. Okay. Renee, go ahead.
Sorry, one more quick thing. I don't know if you all have seen that the favelas in Rio de Janeiro are popping off big bust of drug cartels there. So it's kind of exciting to see South America, and all this activity, hopefully to free all of them. I mean, it's between Milei being reelected and everything. I'm hopeful. I think hopefully we're seeing a brighter, more prosperous future for all of them there.
I agree wholeheartedly. I just find it very interesting that we have all of these major drug things going on simultaneously, and I don't think that's a coincidence. There does seem to be a growing effort to address it, and I'm here for it. Since we know where they're all at now. I just feel like we're and I think that's funny because that's what Brian and Dwayne has been telling me for a long time. You're at the finish line. You know all of this stuff, and you have to wait for everybody else to catch up. And I definitely get that feeling watching the stuff that's going on. So I'm glad that we're all part of this. Go ahead.
Having backstage passes to a concert,
Yeah.
my opinion.
Yeah.
Like you already know how it's going to end and understand how everything's coming together.
Yeah. It's definitely very interesting to watch. That's for sure. All right. I'll look for that list to see if I can find it. If not, you'll have to wait till I get back home and find it in that book. All right, guys.
Uncle Pee-Pee?
Have a nice evening, and I'll see you at 9:30.
Maybe not.
What, Bridget? Bridget.
Oh, nothing. 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 Have a great trip. Be careful. Hot mic.
Okay. All right. You guys take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye. See you guys later.